Welcome to Something to Say, where we bring voices from diverse backgrounds who will share their unique stories and perspectives on finding their passion and provide insights on how you can find yours. Join us as host Greg DeShields guides us through this enlightening journey.
Welcome to Something to Say podcast, a unique platform that amplifies the voices of individuals from various backgrounds sharing their passions. I'm your host, Greg DeShields, and I am pleased to bring you another episode. Thank you for joining us today as we welcome Tasha Jones, CEO and founder of LV Jones Consulting. Tasha is a business operations strategist, speaker, and CEO of LV Jones Consulting, where she empowers organizations to align business strategies with inclusive brand storytelling and community impact. Drawing on 2 decades of experience in marketing and public-private partnerships, Tasha helps leaders cut through corporate jargon to foster authentic team synergy, stakeholder alignment, and measurable progress. Her work champions belonging as a human-centered business imperative rooted in lived experience, strategic insight, and a relentless commitment to turning work culture values into action. Welcome, Tasha.
Tasha, I am so excited to be able to do this interview with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm excited to take a deep dive in the past and the future projects that you've been involved with. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for having me. So honored to be here with you.
So to our audience, I always like to give them a little bit more of the backstory. Tasha and I have actually worked together in the past where you came and visited us here in Philadelphia and served as a panelist for one of our conferences. So I personally want to thank you for that. And I don't know, I think we need to do another conference in the future.
Count me in, sign me up. Anything that you lead, sign me up.
Well, I certainly look forward to it. And you are top on my list. So in terms of our podcast, while we love to engage in some serious conversation, we always want our audience to have an opportunity to get to know you. So we'll start with a few get to know you questions, and then we'll start to move to more rigorous content. So are you up for that?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's begin way back, or maybe not way back, but a while back. What's your favorite childhood memory?
Favorite childhood memory. I think one that comes flooding forward to my mind is one-on-one time with my mom, watching TV shows or doing movie marathons. So I credit my mom for introducing me to Shirley Temple and the Little Rascals, on a Sunday morning. And then also being able I remember in high school, I was doing a movie marathon with Godfather, like all the Godfather series. And so I'm telling you, from like little kid to high school, that continuum of one-on-one time with her, catching up on entertainment. So great.
Wow. As we ask that question of individuals when we do our podcast, so often those memories are so relevant to either a safe space, a haven in their mind today, or it's just one of those motivators that helps them get through a tough day. So that sounds really cool. And I'm so impressed, about Shirley Temple and the Little Rascals.
Yes. Thank you, Gwendolyn.
So what was, this is a bit of a shift, but I always like to hear some of the response. What was your biggest failure and what did you learn from that?
I would say I look at failure or mistake or, just what you're asking, what it resulted in, like what was the biggest lesson? And I'd say for me, I had so many iterations of life where I attempted to alter myself or contort myself to belong, whether that was in friend groups or whether that was to adjust myself within corporate culture. And what I learned, I want to say in my 30s, I had this epiphany of, wait a minute, like what lights me up? Where do I find fulfillment? How do I move in like providing value? What am I really good at? And what responds to that value? And when I started staying in that lane, I started to discover purpose for how I show up, where I show up, and where my passions lie in being of service to community, being of service to teams, to family, what have you. And when I got really clear on that fulfillment, I started to learn the lesson of the failure and trying to be something I wasn't. And actually, there's such fulfillment and authenticity in just moving in to your own beat, right? And I think that it gets easier and easier with age, thankfully. But I'd say my biggest mistake was just trying to be something that wasn't natural to who I am.
Well, I love how you say failure is just something that I'm not. So that's an
Mhm.
interesting perspective. I know also that when we ask that question, often the individuals that we interview, they like to maybe deconstruct it
Mhm.
because it's not failure. And for many, it's that learning experience and how you take that and adapt it to your life as you go forward. But thank you for your insights on that.
Of course, I think you can call it failure. I just think that there's grace in accepting it as, but it was such a tremendous lesson learned. And I think that's the silver lining in those experiences. And I had many lessons learned. It wasn't just
I
that
think
one
we
that I
all.
shared with you today.
All right, so this is a little bit more enjoyable. So if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would that be and why?
I will tell you, it would be Maya Angelou. And I think that she has been such an influence on my world in iterations. I'm talking like from through college, post college, transitions through career, transitions through adulthood. And I remember a pivotal moment at 28 years old where I was questioning. Remember, I talked about failure of not knowing my value. And I remember being at a moment where I didn't feel like I was fully valued in the workplace I was in. And I came across it, 28 years old, came across this quote that said, if you don't like your situation, change it. And if you can't change it, change your attitude. And when I tell you that that was such a visceral light bulb moment for me, that I took on this tremendous amount of accountability where, okay, if I don't like this situation, let me start looking for other opportunity. And in the interim, I'm going to change my attitude to make the best of what these remaining days, or maybe something will manifest. And so I will tell you that when it ended up happening, I'm changing my attitude. I'm showing up with the right can do spirit
Mhm.
and ended up getting an opportunity to go work for another real estate developer. And that company I was working for was trying to find ways to keep me because I was had such the attitude that made them not want to lose me. And I think just that was my first lesson in accountability and mindset shift that has served me the decades that followed. And so to be able to sit with her and just thank her for the beauty and the magic of her prose, and then also just to, be silent and listen to any wisdom that she would choose to evoke. I would be receptive like a sponge.
I mean, I could only imagine how incredibly intense that experience would be because there'd be so many things that she would share that you want to really unpack that and get even that much deeper. But I want to ask you, what would you serve at that dinner?
Oh, I would be so intimidated to cook for the illustrious Maya Angelou. But if I was to dare to introduce her to something, there's this beautiful book, cookbook by Melissa Clark called Dinner. And in there's this delicious meal. I wish I could tell you like the page number. I love this. It's like a go-to for me every now and then, but it's this harissa chicken. I've talked about it with other folks, and it's got like that lovely smoky harissa spice and potatoes and leeks and this lovely garlic yogurt. I would venture to serve something like that to her because it's one of my favorite palate like satisfying meals.
Wow. So it would equal the playing field because you'd have even that kind of unique and sophisticated meal that you could explain to her. She's sharing.
I would hope that she would even be intrigued to want to learn more. Uh, I would even make adjustments if I would want to know if she had any food allergies and if this was appropriate to serve her for sure.
Wow. So let's go a little bit deeper and learn more about you and your story. So, how big is your inner circle?
Oh, that I love that question because I'm such a believer that we become the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And so you got to be really discerning and particular about who those 5 are. And that is the reason why I limit that inner circle number to 5.
Well, and I've talked to a number of people who, as they get older, they clearly reduce that to a size that is one that they are truly confident that they have the trust in that group to tell you when I'm doing good and when I'm doing bad. But I've also heard some people call it a front row, which I think is pretty spectacular too when I hear that. So,
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big believer of there's a theater. Who has access to enter the theater? Where do they sit in the theater? Are they in the mezzanine? Are they in the front row? Or are they waiting outside for admission? And so I think I definitely subscribe to that analogy. I love it.
yeah, very cool. All right, who has had the most influence in your life?
Oh, I don't know how this is going to land. I might catch some strays for this one. But this is just real talk. Again, this is from early years to like even today. And so I'm going to say 2 entities, if you will, or people, one of each. One, MTV, may it rest in peace. 2, Oprah Winfrey, because that is those Oprah Winfrey, you read Oprah Winfrey, you hear Oprah Winfrey, you say Oprah Winfrey. That is like the most viscerally heartwarming 2 words that you can ever encounter. But I think like going back to MTV, that came out, I want to say it aired in 81. And in fact, it was actually in my birth month, August 81.
That's
But I
right.
didn't, right? Like August 81. And so that's my birth month. So that was just simpatico right there. And then I first encountered MTV probably like 1983. So I was like 7 or 8. So not really familiar, but definitely became like part of this video generation. And what that experience did for me, I mean, I can tell you about moments in time, just the nostalgia of it through music, through video, because I was partially raised by MTV, like with just the music and the genre. And I will say that experience, like growing up well into adulthood with that MTV influence, it widened my aperture for just an appreciation for music and the soulful connection you can feel and how universal it can be, and the power of story or the absolute confusion, like the erratic confusion of like just directorial liberty taken with doing some of the video production. But yeah, tremendous influence. I literally just told my husband this probably a couple months ago, that what an impact that programming had on my life.
Well, so to give you an idea how I think I had the same experience, I recently had a chance to see a video production that Michael Jackson did for MTV. And in it, he had Eddie Murphy and everyone. It was just this incredible production. And I remember what it was like. Like it was almost as if I was still living it again, I knew it was going to come on at 7 o'clock at night, and everyone had to be at MTV. And it was this combination of story and music and dance and everything. And like I'm standing there listening to the music, and all of it flooded back as if I was like watching it for the first time. So I can appreciate it. I think I was a big fan of MTV as well. So
Right. I mean, you hear people say like, oh, that was the soundtrack of my life or my childhood. And I think of MTV was like, the videos of our generation. Like it was just such a time of the era of each pivotal transition and, becoming teenagers and then adults and then professional, just I think I can mark every stage of life during that MTV era.
wow, very cool. All right, so this is a bit of a different take from the other question that talked about failure. So, when was the best year of your life and when was the worst year of your life?
I'd say both for 2020.
Mm.
2020, I will say it was the best year of my life because in 2019, I had this incredible vision, right? I had this vision, this whole vision board had these quadrants around social goals, long-term goals, short-term goals, family goals. And it was just going to be this due north for me going into 2020. And also, I had this aspiration of launching my side hustle that would become LV Jones Consulting. I was so sure that I would launch that in 2020. And so I did this whole brand campaign called Tasha Vision 2020. Picture it, right? And some people would say, "Whoa, joke was on you." Come March 2020, and what was so joyful about that, or like making it the best year, was having that structure, that due north, having my kind of vision list matrix on my focus 4 on my wall through that very tumultuous year. I always had something to remember. You want to serve on that board, you get to you're serving on that board now that was on that list. It might be virtual, but you are now serving on that board that was on your list. Or you're able to show up for your family in this way. You're able to make these financial goals, maybe not as quickly, but incrementally. Just kept me focused. So it kept me elevated, again, back to mindset. And I think like that made 2020 one of the best years. I learned how to pivot a little bit. I still launched the side hustle at the end of 2020 because I wanted to follow through on what I started. But I also continued the cadence of putting my thought leadership out onto social throughout that year. So I still made sure that my voice was heard. And then, what made it the hardest year was I experienced such tremendous change all at once. I bought a new house because I got married, and I was welcoming in, I was becoming part of a family. So I was becoming a stepmom. I got a puppy and a cat. I did all these things all at once, major life change. It ended a career that I'd had for well over 20 years and jumped into nonprofit. So I thrust myself into all this change in the midst of, I'm going to use that trite word we heard all the time, an unprecedented moment at the time, like this global pandemic. And so it made it like just the change, all the joyful changes, all concentrated into one hearkening year. It made it the hardest year. So it was the best year of my life and the hardest year, but ultimately back to like lessons, it was the most transformative, like personal lesson. I had to learn a lot too about, remember I said earlier, the mistake of contorting yourself to be something that you're not. I kept trying to figure out like, well, should I be doing this? Maybe I shouldn't. And was like quieting who I am, my voice, and going back to that vision board. It kept reminding me like, no, you're creating something. You have voice. There's power in what you have to say. And I think just lots of lessons learned for Tasha Vision 2020.
It's funny. I've asked a number of people, and they've given that same description about what happened in 2020, because there were so many great things that people were working on coming out of 2019 that were all teed up in 2020. But what has been kind of a constant message is that everyone had to deal with that. It's not like it was just me. It's like everyone was trying to figure out like how long and what are we going to do and how do I, cut my losses, but everyone was kind of living with that same sort of thought, which meant that that good year, bad year thing was kind of like all across the country, rich, poor, whatever, we're all kind of reevaluating that. So
that's right.
Way for you to present that. All right,
Yeah.
I want to dive a little bit more into kind of the things you're in today. So you've worked inside large organizations and now you advise leadership teams. So what are you seeing right now that leaders are getting wrong about alignment and culture? Because for so many organizations, this ability to do better with the ability to focus on what really matters for the organization while also at the same time building a culture that moves it forward.
Yeah, I like that question a lot. I think that the biggest misconception that leaders have is this idea, well, we're communicating. So the fact that there's communication there, that means we're all in alignment. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. You look at teams who can communicate across different platforms, Slack, email, virtual, etc. But just because there's that communication doesn't mean that there's this shared understanding or this common goal of what they're working toward. And so I think that just constant information sharing doesn't necessarily suggest alignment, but I think that teams that are getting it right, they're getting alignment. And what I mean by alignment is like teams who, they know where the organization's going, they know where they fit in, right? They know how their role in the organization contributes to the progress that the organization wants to make or to the vision. And then they also understand like, okay, what's important right now? What is important that we have to get done today in collaboration? And so what I've seen is that you'll see teams like working really, really hard, communicating, ad nauseum. But then when there's any moment of threat, they tend to do that in silo, right? As opposed to in collaborative pipeline, or they tend to do that in territorial project, like, oh, I can't let anybody, I have to own this, I have to get the accolade for this. And I think that, when leaders move really quickly, they want to roll out a plan, they want to roll out a strategy. I think that what happens is then those individual teams or those individual players who revert to functioning in silos, their priorities shift because they're like, well, I have to make sure I shine. I have to make sure I have value and my values known versus, hey, how can we demonstrate value in collaboration? And so I think that organizations who do that alignment work really well, I think they communicate with clarity and they make sure that people know where they fit into the direction of the business. And I think that organizations that don't do that well, they're just expecting adoption and to move forward at rapid speed, regardless of misalignment.
It's not in our questions, but you sparked an interesting perspective I wanted to maybe hear some of your thoughts about. So leaders and companies certainly over many decades have had to make decisions about how they will move in terms of public sentiment. But the intensity of what happened as a result of the murder of George Floyd, and obviously we had the pandemic, organizations were making decisions that may or may not have had the kind of authenticity that was really confirming the fact that it was a part of their culture, that it was something that's aligned. So, to kind of go a little bit further on what you were just talking about in terms of organizations and this idea of alignment and culture, how do they ensure that there's an authentic component of it and that they're not just doing it once again because pressure on the outside or it helps to do a good annual report?
I love that you've resurfaced that question. It's an important conversation to continue having. I think that what that moment taught us in hindsight is never make an org-wide decision based on emotion, because then it's just going to like thrust you into this performative lane because you don't really mean it, you don't really believe it. And so I think what's so critical for any major, culture shift, civil unrest, social justice, reckoning, realignment is that that there's this reevaluation of like, okay, what's the strategy of the business? And in this, how are we prioritizing people? And then who and the ways are we making sure that we do that? Who are the players? So who's responsible for how we prioritize people? Is that HR? Is that our employee resource groups, our associate resource groups? Okay, great. Then how are we keeping those teams, those roles engaged at an org-wide level around, all right, what can these groups collectively do or demonstrate to be in alignment with the business? So if you're going to have these ERGs like in their charters, then how is their charter in alignment with one of the pillars of the business? And then how are they bringing in everyone together through a speaker series or professional development opportunity or learning and development or growth opportunity that demonstrates like, hey, hosted by this ERG, here's this opportunity to learn. I don't know if your vertical is corporate excellence. Here's your opportunity to learn excellence in customer service is just what I'm thinking of off the top of my head. And so how are we making sure that when we have those moments of shift is what are we doing to create opportunity to listen to employees and make sure that any change or action that happens is truly in alignment with the direction of the business and its priorities, and that it's an enhancement to it. It makes everyone better. It creates belonging because people had voice to advance those ideas or to make sure folks felt safe, and that leadership authentically believes that. So then leadership is doing what they need to do to grow and understand the complexities, but not this broad brush, short-lived, here's our statement, here's how we're committed, and then it gets put on the shelf.
And I think that approach really helps to ensure that there's trust that really supports that idea of building alignment, as well as really putting an emphasis around the culture of your organization. So I thank you for bearing with me and extending a little bit more thought around that. So you've often said that organizations move fast, but not forward. So what does that actually look like in practice? And how do you help teams shift that?
Yeah, when I talk about moving fast but not forward, like think about how we can be really busy. Remember, and maybe this still happens. The past 6 years I've tried to remove myself from this narrative, but I was a product of it as well, which how are you doing, Greg? Oh, doing great, Tasha. How about you? Oh, I'm just so busy. Right? Just always like just this idea of like, oh, I'm just so busy. But yeah, but in the busy, what am I moving toward? What's the progress I'm making? How am I connected to community, the business, how we're making progress? And so I think that when there's this idea of teams being busy, I think that what gets missed is, okay, but where's ownership? Where's decision-making rules? Where are the priorities? And then that way we have clarity around how do we move forward outside of the busy? Like what's the deadline? And I think when leaders, so that's what I do. I work with leadership teams to create that alignment around, all right, how do we get out of the busy and actually move to where you want to see the team going in assessing like, okay, where do the shared priorities need to be? Where is there friction? And how do we work through that? And then then this idea of alignment, like where do we assign responsibility? I'm really big on the RACI model. So responsible, accountable, consulted, supported, and informed. And understanding that with projects, with expectations, with deadlines, like whose role is what. And then that way we know how we're moving forward together. And so that's what I mean by, hey, there's this tendency to move fast and be really, really busy, but how are we moving forward together with definition of roles and shared priorities? Yeah.
When I saw that question, maybe because I'm a bit of a car guy or been spending more time in my car, but I often look at individuals who drive very fast and zigzag in and out of the lanes, and they're definitely going fast, but they're really not going that much forward because I see them next to me or behind me at the red lights.
It was me. It was me. I made no progress, but I was trying to go fast and got nowhere. Sorry, Greg.
So with so much change going on in the market, we have obvious innovation, the artificial intelligence, the workforce shift, multi-generations, the economic pressures that seem to kind of get either more intense or just kind of ebb and flow. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for leaders who want to get it right?
I think, I'd bring up that shared understanding again, that model of assess, align, and activate. Things are moving so quickly, and AI absolutely is accelerating the speed of information and the way we can scale it. And I think that idea of shared understanding speaks to how important the human element is, how important that, people scale trust, people build collaboration, people provide that discernment. And so I think it's important for leaders to make sure that they're communicating clarity that of shared understanding. Again, that shared understanding of here's the vision and here's how we got here. Here's the strategic plan or priorities for that vision based on the feedback that I received from you as workforce, as employees. And here's how we'd like to move this strategic vision forward, and here's how you fit in. And actually, I think leaders in seeking to get shared understanding, I think it's important that they ask the question, like, what's unclear?
Hmm.
What's unclear, and making, some refinements
Hmm.
in the process. And then so that there's this collective adoption and understanding of that vision, that shared understanding of that vision. Because I think that ambiguity can be so mentally draining. We
Hmm.
all know that it's an energy suck. And
Mhm.
so I think when leaders can help get ahead of that ambiguity and help people know where they can plug in, again, the RACI model
Hmm.
specific to team level, I think that that's the move for leaders.
Hmm. It's interesting because the integration of artificial intelligence just like 3 years ago was like this never, never, never. And employers always kind of gave the impression to their employees that this is a bad thing. And most were
Mhm.
kind of, pretty paranoid. And the way that it has evolved so incredibly quickly. And now there are organizations that are integrating the use of artificial intelligence. And how do in that short period of time, spend from where we as a company said no, no, no to here as a company now saying it's woven into our strategy. It's like this is how we move forward. And all those things we said about how chat boxes are really bad, we do think that they offer us some business opportunity and competitive advantage. So I think that's an important thing as leaders are adding those kind of things that were considered an opposition to business, that now they're an added enhancement to business. And to your point, getting that human engagement and that confidence and belief that it's not here to replace you, it's actually a tool that's going to help you work, smarter and better. Too.
I think it help you work smarter and better, but I think it forces that collaboration. It forces that we have to, I mean, we're interpreting the information differently. My read AI notes or whatever my note taker is could be interpreting different than yours. What did we miss? Like, what are we supposed to be doing to move forward together to fulfill these expectations and deadlines? And then to your point about just that kind of hesitancy 3 years ago, and quite frankly, resistance by some folks, right? It reminds me of back when social media and Twitter was coming on, which now it's X, but like whatever, I can't even believe I referenced that one. So let's talk about Facebook and the others and Instagram. But when those were coming on the scene, I'll never forget that with the team I was leading. So I was working for a big real estate developer, and we were overseeing this master plan community. I was helping to tell story about this master plan community. And my team were like, oh yeah, we're gonna venture into social media. We're gonna try to tell our story in this new landscape. And you had corporate kind of hesitant, like, ooh, I don't know if we should do it, please. And so we, of course, tried to find ways because this was like new territory. So we're finding ways, what are our parameters? Don't get political, just keep it about the community. And for every time someone says something incorrect about the community, come with 3 points that, you know, 3 reasons why or how it's, to clarify and answer. Anyway, my point is we ended up being kind of like these guinea pigs, or chose to test it out, be the pioneers, I should say. That's probably a better word. That corporate ended up reaching out to us saying, hey, we see that you're venturing into this social media landscape. It sounds so ancient to give that as an example today, right? And so that's what I think of. I'm reminded of that moment where here, our corporate office was asking my regional office for some insights on what's been working well and what, I mean, we were trying to listen to social media sentiment, what conversations were happening. We were just in
Right.
it. And then it helped create some rules and ground rules that corporate could then spread out across the whole corporate company wide. But I think similarly, yes, AI can make us more efficient. It certainly is going to spark some collaboration. I think for pioneers, what we're seeing, and you're hearing governments talk about this, is there's tremendous responsibility in learning what the guardrails need to be, what from a governance standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from data protection. And so while, yes, this is like the Wild West right now, I think companies and their teams need to be thinking about how do we protect the humans as they're working to be discerning in the way we use these tools.
Yeah, and that emphasis around tools is what really makes it clear to people so that there's not confusion in terms of the role that it plays. So the
Yeah.
last question I have for you before we jump into our last question from our Something to Say podcast. For someone who's listening to this particular podcast, who's leading a team right now, what's the one thing they could do immediately to create a better alignment and connection?
I think I'm going to reiterate that point I made earlier about be willing to ask the question at any iteration, any moment, like what's unclear, and be willing to hear that, receive that feedback, and answer with authenticity. I don't think that we can force people into a direction of the company. We see how they'll leave, they'll find other options, they'll start their own business, right? They'll figure something out. So I think when you're trying to really connect with the teams you're leading and the workforce you're leading, is you value their contribution by asking them what's unclear and then providing that clarity and reassuring them how their role, their contribution fits into the whole, is helping to move forward, and really celebrating that idea of collaboration, creating that shared understanding. And I think that, again, that idea, and this is where we help teams, like helping teams, again, what are the priorities? Giving people that clarity. What's ownership? Who owns what? And what are the expectations? And so asking that question, what's unclear?
Wow. And that would really be an easy, as I go into the office Monday morning with my cup of coffee, that I can sit down and maybe talk with some of those who are part of my executive team and responding to that. So thank you so much for giving that walk away value out of the conversation. All right, so we've got to that point of our podcast, which we enjoy quite a bit. So the podcast is entitled Something to Say. So what do you have to say?
Okay, if there's one thing that I could say, I'm a big believer. One time I was asked a question like, what do you think is an important leadership quality? And I said, empathy. But now, as I've been working with teams, and I think that empathy, yes, is a very strong leadership balanced with civility. And so the one thing that I have to say is empathy and civility are imperative leadership skills. And so when you're thinking about empathy, it's seeking understanding, clarity without assumption. And when you think about civility, it's making sure that you're providing, in the process of having that understanding or seeking understanding, you're having really clear expectations and of deadlines, of roles, of what excellence looks like. It's not arbitrary, it's very clear. And then you're holding people accountable to that, yourself included. And so I think as leaders, when we are leading with that empathy and that civility, that we also model follow through. We model the follow through of when they answer the question, what's unclear, that we then circle back with, I heard you, and here's how.
Wow.
That's the one thing I'd like to say.
Tasha, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I have to say, the degree of passion that you bring to our conversation today is amongst the reason why we created this podcast, because your insights are so incredibly valuable and informative. And I think for our audience, it's certainly something that they will connect with. So thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure having you on our show. And I'm hoping that you and I can once again get together and do a project.
Oh, great. Listen, I thank you for having me in the show. I hope that what came through is how much I care about people and the power of connection. And Greg, I mean to tell you, getting connected with you years ago has been one of the highlights, and being reconnected in this way is just such a highlight of the week.
Well, you're going to leave me speechless, but I have to do the closing. So for our audience, that's a wrap for this episode of Something to Say. I encourage you to stay tuned for more inspiring conversations with voices of individuals from various diverse backgrounds sharing their passion. So until next time, this is Greg DeShields.
Thank you for tuning in to Something to Say. We trust you found some valuable insights and takeaways that can help you find your passion. Don't miss out on future episodes. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your preferred platform. We value your feedback and suggestions, so let us know how we can serve you better. Keep the conversation going and stay inspired until we meet again. Take care and happy listening.